So really, I think I'm rather fortunate having survived and done 50 years of flying.
B-17 was a bomber which could not be shot down.
Of all the bombers operating against German-occupied Europe during the Second World War, the most famous was undoubtedly the B-17, the Flying Fortress. Operating from airfields in Norfolk and Suffolk, this highly efficient aircraft was an odd but welcome addition to the quiet English countryside. The springboard for thousands of sorties to the continent and far into the German heartland.
When the B-17 came over to Germany to fly attacks against German towns and targets, the German air defense fighters were shocked because this was a bomber which could not be shot down just as they liked to do it before with other aircraft. It was armed so heavily that the fighters very often were shot down.
The Memphis Belle, the first flying fortress to complete 25 bombing missions, has in later years become synonymous with the B-17. Due to the successful David Putnam film, these pictures are actual combat footage filmed during this famous 25th mission. Briefing starts at 0800. Pilots, bombardiers and navigators take their places and Group Commander Colonel Stanley Ray reveals for the first time the target for the day. It wasn't that long ago these young men were sitting in high school and college classrooms, maybe not paying too much attention, but here you concentrate. There's a great deal of vital information to absorb. Type of formation, weather conditions, altitude, enemy fighters, and where they might be encountered, type of bombs deployed, and of course, details about the target. This is the crew of the Memphis Belle, 324th Squadron, 91st Heavy Bombardment Group. Just one crew, one plane in one squadron, in one group, in one wing, in one Air Force.
On the ball gang, and she'll bring us back like she's always done, okay?
The captain gives the usual advice. Don't yell on the intercom, save your ammo, and make every shot count. "24 missions completed, and the crew of the Memphis Belle are well aware that if they return, it is back to the US to train other crews and a well-deserved rest." This is a special mission for the Memphis Belle, but it is also just one of thousands of sorties for this Air Force against enemy targets, steadily breaking down Germany's ability to fight back, hitting aircraft factories, oil reserves, ball bearing plants, engine factories, power plants, and other targets essential to the war effort. There is a job to be done. The pilot is Captain Robert Morgan, an industrial engineer from North Carolina, who was known as a bit of a ladies' man. He named the plane after his favorite girl, Margaret Polk from Memphis. Co-pilot, Captain Jim Varinas, business administration student from Connecticut. Radio operator and gunner is Sergeant Bob Hansen from Spokane, Washington. Navigator, Captain Chuck Layton, chemistry student from Ohio. Engineer and top turret gunner, Sergeant Harold Locke, Green Bay, Wisconsin. Tail gunner, Sergeant John Quinlan from Yonkers, New York. Ball turret gunner, Sergeant Cecil Scott, New Jersey.
Pilot to crew, 10,000, put on oxygen.
Bombardier is Captain Vincent Evans, trucking operator from Fort Worth, Texas. Right waist gunner, Sergeant Bill Winchell, chemist, Chicago. Left waist gunner, Sergeant Tony Nestel from Detroit. 10 young men from all walks of life dedicated to a common purpose. Helmets on as the enemy coast comes into view. They are now within reach of German radar, and they know they can expect both flak and fighters. And there is indeed the first flak. They keep their tight formation even tighter. The run into the target has begun, but the Germans have now accurately calculated altitude, position, speed, and course, and the flak is getting heavy. You could walk on it, but at this stage, there can be no deviation from the planned course as Bombardier Evans is lining up his sight. The target, the docks and U-boat pens in Wilhelmshaven, is in sight, and Evans has calibrated for altitude and speed. He makes the final adjustments, the bomb doors are open, and it's bombs away. Evans must be good. When he drops, the rest of the squadron follows his lead. And he is. German fighter commands Messerschmitt 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s have now reached altitude and attack. But they must not be allowed to interfere with the squadron's remaining bomb runs. The B-17s are well equipped to deal with the new threat. It is at least an even fight. As soon as the fighters are gone, the flak resumes and casualties are unavoidable. This ship won't make it back to base. Leaving the target area, Captain Morgan is scanning the sky for the fighters that are sure to appear. And here they are.
Two fighters, 6 o'clock up, coming in, diving out, Chief. Coming in.
They're coming in, Scotty.
Look, he's bailing out. B-17 out of control at 3 o'clock.
Come on, you guys, get out of that plane. Bail out.
There's one. He come out of the bomb bay.
Yeah, I see him.
There's a tail gunner coming out.
Eventually, the squadron is out of reach of both flak and fighters and can set a direct course for home. But they are as yet unable to assess damage and losses. That'll have to wait. The ground crews are acutely aware at any time where the squadron is supposed to be, going out or coming back home. And the hour approaches when the first B-17s are supposed to show. This waiting is very aptly called sweating out the mission. The patients in the hospital are observing the first flares, wounded on board. The planes have landing priority. As soon as they touch the ground, the ambulances with experienced medical staff are on the spot. Head wound, possible concussion. An anti-aircraft grenade exploded in his radio compartment. Shock, internal injuries. Grenade splinters, multiple injuries. They will all get the Purple Heart, though some posthumously. "36 aircraft left in the morning. How many are returning? This one, number 26, has a bumpy landing, but the pilot is badly injured. A miracle he brought the plane back at all. 27, badly damaged. The crews emerging from the battle-scarred bombers are laughing and joking. Their relief is obvious. They have survived yet another mission in this, the most dangerous front of the war. But in the control tower, they are still looking out for the remaining 9 aircraft. And another 3 appear in the sky. 28, 29, 30. And one is the Memphis Belle. Contrary to all regulations, Captain Morgan decides to strafe the airfield before making his landing run. But this is a very special occasion, and there won't be any disciplinary actions this time. For the crew of the Memphis Belle, the shooting war is over, and they are all going back home. They have more than done their share, and have good reason to celebrate, and even to show their affection for an aircraft that served them well. Brigadier General Hansel visited the field and presented the DFC, the Distinguished Flying Cross, to every member of the crew. As a final honor, further dignitaries arrive from London. The King and Queen pay their respects to a probably overwhelmed crew. There will be many stories to tell in Yonkers, Detroit, Chicago, and other places. And then finally, the orders for the Memphis Belle's 26th mission. Return to the United States of America to promote war bonds and to train much-needed new crews. But it wasn't only the Memphis Belle. The B-17 was an aircraft that was viewed with a great deal of affection, almost from the day it first hit an operational runway. And they were all given names that were special to their crews. Here's Glamour Gal, and there were Old Bill, Adorable, Lucky Strike, Miss Wachita, Princess Pat, and many more. Whatever name they carried, the B-17 was pushing the frontier into the enemy's territory, and its successes were greatly encouraging the folks back home.
Say, that's really good news, isn't it?
Yeah, those fortresses sure can dish it up.
But this stage was only reached after many years of dedicated work, testing, and research. In the lean years of the early 1930s, the Boeing designers, thinking of the aircraft of tomorrow, thought of a huge military plane, tough, fast, and rangy, the ultimate bomber with strong defenses, a flying fortress. It would be hard to build this new weapon, many mechanical problems to solve, wings accepting stress larger than ever, undercarriages capable of sustaining 30 tons plus, to name just a couple.
Boeing 299, you are clear to take off.
And endless testing. Initially, it looked as if it would remain an idea, but in 1934, the Army Air Corps asked for a new bomber design, and the Boeing people could get to work in earnest. And the first B-17, bristling with arms, impressed the military sufficiently for them to order 13, so they could carry out their own field tests. At Boeing, research went on. Real flight conditions are replicated with scale models, common today, but advanced technology in the 30s. As the B-17 went higher and higher, designed to avoid enemy flak, at 18,000 feet the air becomes too thin to breathe, and at 25,000 feet the engines are gasping for breath. At 35,000 feet the temperature is 60 degrees below, and oil freezers and lubricated controls just won't work. Boeing's laboratories also recreate the extreme conditions of the stratosphere more than 8 miles up, testing the performance of vital equipment. Better break down now than over enemy territory. Exhausting field tests are also required. Nothing can be left to chance when designing the ultimate in modern air power. And day by day, week by week, the B-17 gets better and better. It'll fly faster, longer and higher, carry more arms, and be able to deliver a larger and larger payload. Acoustic research is helping to reduce noise levels, and the sound that can't be killed is muffled. This extensive research and development did benefit civil aviation as well. Two significant developments were the Clipper and the fully pressurized passenger aircraft, the Stratoliner. But there was opposition to the B-17. Could the expense of building this aircraft, however superb it might be, during a period of world peace be justified? Couldn't the research money be better deployed elsewhere? Then the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor, and America is at war. The need for an efficient and advanced bomber is now paramount to the US Army Air Force, and production has to be stepped up considerably to meet the demands. Thousands of B-17s are needed, and Boeing's engineers are ready for that too. New manufacturing practices are swiftly developed. For example, the aircraft is broken down to 7 sub-assemblies, each completed on a separate production line, making better use of available space. This is prefabrication on a massive scale. Boeing is turning out more aircraft per square foot of factory space than any other manufacturer. But however fast they roll off the production line, the demands are for still higher output, and the Boeing engineers are constantly trying to improve work practices, developing new machines and tools. Great savings were, for example, made when the 5 miles of electrical wiring required by a B-17 were no longer installed individually, but bundled together in sections and installed as larger units. Throughout the plant, the tempo quickens, and the output is improved by some 40% within 6 months at Pearl Harbor. It is straight from the production line into combat on aerial front all over the world, England, Australia, India, and Africa, making it possible to hit the enemy by day as well as by night. But nobody is resting on their laurels. The Boeing engineers continue to strive for further improvements, using the experience gained from combat situations. The B-17, the Flying Fortress, is more than making its mark in the global air war that was developing. The raid on Regensburg and Schweinfurt on 17th of August 1943 can, in many ways, be considered a typical working day for the B-17. The preparations start many hours before 0 hour. 0700 in the morning, the weathermen are gathering information from high-flying planes and sending the data back to the weather station on the ground, where meteorologists prepare the forecasts and charts that are so vital to any bomber command preparing for a major operation. And this is Bomber Command. This is where the wheels are put in motion. Targets are selected in cooperation with High Command. But central to any sortie is, yet again, the weather.
What's the weather prospects today, Major?
Looks like most of Germany will be pretty good, sir. But we have a warm front approaching.
Aerial surveillance photographs of the mission area will help to identify specific targets to the group commanders when they are briefed. And weather information comes in a steady stream.
Forecast still hold?
Yes, sir, there's practically no change in the situation, and we still expect the base weather to hold up for return.
Stable weather makes it possible to confirm selected targets.
How many ships will we have tomorrow?
Well, sir, if you recall, General, on our last mission we had...
Give me combat lane for conference, please.
The operations officer must also take aircraft and crews available into consideration when he makes his final and detailed plans.
Field order requires that we provide the 2nd Combat Wing and the 2nd Air Task Force.
See, this field order has called for 3,100 gallons for the agent due to the distance.
To assure the right supplies of ammunition, bombs and fuel for more than 300 aircraft is a complex matter that involves a number of Air Force agencies, and everything has to work with clockwork precision. When the routes to target and possible decoy routes have been selected, scores of detailed maps have to be prepared ready for pilots and navigators at the briefing in the morning. The ground crews must prepare the aircraft for the mission. The normal work of keeping a B-17 fit for operation is enormous, even in peacetime, so when battle damage is added, the problems can become gigantic. Just arming the flying fortress with more than 4 tons of bombs and the ammunition for 8 50 caliber machine guns and the single 30 caliber machine gun can take several hours.
Okay, fellas, roll out. We have ration this morning. Breakfast in half an hour.
Okay, fellas, let's go.
It's fine, just when I had a 48-hour pass coming up.
What do you think, Dubs? They'll be shooting at us. Sometimes I don't think those Jerry's got proper respect for us. Okay, boys, let's go.
And finally, the early morning briefing of pilots, co-pilots and navigators. This is the first time the men who will crew the planes are told their destination. The target for today is the ball bearing plant in Schweinfurt and the Messerschmitt factory at Regensburg.
And you'll love this. It's the country club of the German Air Force.
We've planned the route so as to avoid as much flak as possible. Should see plenty of air activity. Let's hope that most of it is ours.
And the squadron leader always has his personal contribution.
Men, the going's going to be rough. You're going to have to blow your necks in there, stay in there and pitch. Flak will be heavy, probably active. Been through worse before.
Finally, the navigators and bombardiers are briefed. As dawn is breaking, the ground crews are still hard at it, aware of the approaching 0700 deadline. The crews are making their final preparations, leaving personal effects, dressing for the planned 30,000 feet altitude, picking up the last weather maps, and dealing with other important issues.
Most of all, it was the FM being my God, for all who are concerned with all my love. I firmly resolve with the help of my gracious sister, best myself.
The captain has a few words with his crew members before boarding, reminding them of their individual and collective duties and wishing everybody good luck. Synchronized watchers are counting down the last few seconds before 0 hour. Thousands of horsepower roars into life in the cold morning air. It is a complex matter to get more than 300 aircraft into a tight formation and at the right altitude and speed and the bombers are over the North Sea before every ship is in place. The navigator replots the course as they are closing in on the enemy coast just north of Holland, protected by dense cloud cover. But now the formation is within German radar reach, and German flak is quick to react, though soon to be replaced by another danger, Messerschmitt 109 fighters.
And they thought about ways of attack, and one of these ways was not to attack from behind or from the front, but to attack from below. There was a thing like, it was called the schräge Musik. That means behind the fighter pilot there were two cannons directed upwards with an angle of 70 degrees. Then the aircraft, the fighter aircraft, went below the B-17 and shot just upside against the bomber, and that was effective. Well, besides this method of shooting upwards, other forms of attack were used, like front quarter attacks when the approaching speed was very high and the bomber saw the attacking fighter late. This one had a chance to turn in from the front quarter and to shoot at the bomber. Very often the question how many German fighters were lost in these two attacks, but the problem is that we cannot give the numbers. The reason is that the archive of the Luftwaffe was burned on the order of Feldmarschall Göring on the 8th of May 1945. So we have only left about 20% of all the Luftwaffe documents. So we do not have the stories, not the diaries, war diaries of the different squadrons and wings, so we cannot answer this question anymore.
The bomber formation is a virtual wall of steel and fire that proceed toward the target without deviation, and there are heavy casualties on both sides. The target is near and the fighters withdraw. Flak is expected. Bombardier and navigator must concentrate on the job in hand, the inevitable heavy flak notwithstanding.
Additionally to the air defense fighters, the air defense system of Germany also used the anti-aircraft artillery, and for this they mainly had the 8.8 centimeter cannon, which was very effective against aircraft which were flying in an altitude which they could reach. I think sometimes they try to avoid the areas where a concentration of anti-aircraft artillery was known.
The formation is now over the target and is kept tight. The bombardiers are lining up their sights and the target cameras are activated, ready to record every hit. There is a last-ditch effort by German fighters, but they will not be allowed to disrupt the bomb run now in progress. Not even the loss of one of the flying fortresses can be allowed to interfere. It's inevitable. It's the preliminary results of what appears to be a successful mission is radioed back to base as the formation sets a course for home. Marauder bombers now take off to attack German fighter bases as an added protection for the returning B-17s, many limping badly with heavy damage. And on the last stretch, fighters offer the last bit of vital protection. As usual, the ground crews are sweating out the mission, a mission that was so big that it is impossible at this stage to ascertain who are coming back and who stayed out there. There are a more than usual amount of flares indicating wounded on board. The targets were important and heavily defended.
They hit and killed about 60 aircraft out of 200 and I think it was 46, I'm not quite sure.
It was, in fact, according to Allied information, 376. But even considering that number of sorties, the loss of 60 aircraft and the loss of some 600 crew members was devastating. This was one raid on one single day. Anything urgent is immediately reported to the hot newsroom.
Well, boys, how are you?
Well, kind of long, not too tough.
Best bombing job we've ever done. Good, good. Somebody in trouble?
Yeah, we saw one B-17. The ship went down, apparently under control, and saw it hit the water.
Yes, I was looking through the glasses, and I saw 2 dinghies come out, and 10 men, apparently all okay.
Ditched crews were the obvious and immediate beneficiaries of this early debriefing procedure. Individual debriefing was one way of establishing a clear picture of the raid, successes and failures.
On the target. So I think those guys are really trying to shoot us down.
One of them blew up in the air, and the other one went down in flames.
I knocked down 2. They were making attacks about 5 o'clock level.
Okay, B, number of aircraft dispatched.
20.
C, number of aircraft attacking primary.
Another method of gathering data was obviously the interpretation of the photographs taken over the target area. The raid had, in fact, been reasonably successful, though it did not quite achieve Bomber Command's original expectations, and the price was high.
The loss of industrial efficiency was about 10%, not more than that.
The B-17 also excelled in other theaters of war. In the Pacific, the U.S. Navy had managed to break a secret Japanese code and had intercepted a communication that detailed Japanese plans to attack the Midway and the Aleutians, with an invasion army supported by an enormous task force. If the Japanese knew the code had been broken, this could have been a wild goose chase or a trap. The Americans decided to gamble. If they could intercept the Japanese Navy at Midway, the payoff could be enormous. The Hawaiian Department had to beg, steal, and borrow bombers from slim Pacific forces. The B-17s committed to this mission was led by Colonels Walter Sweeney and Brooke Allen, and every last plane would be needed. The Japanese fleet of more than 80 warships advanced. The main force heading towards the Midway was spotted 470 miles west of the island by a Catalina, and the battle stage was set. The newly arrived B-17s, B-26s, and Marine fighters were under constant alert. They installed extra petrol tanks to increase bomber range. The crews knew that this would be the first test of the B-17 as a defense weapon against attacking surface forces. Nine B-17 under Colonel Sweeney, joined by 5 from Colonel Allen's squadron, took off in search of the enemy. Rendezvous was Curry Island, from where the bombers would proceed west towards the target. But 100 miles out, Bomber Command received new orders to change course and go after an enemy force that had broken off from the main fleet and was launching an attack against the U.S. base on the Midway. The mission of the Imperial carrier planes was to wake the island's gun positions and bomb away for an invasion. Navy Vindicators took off to meet the enemy, and the battle was on. While the Japanese were pounding the Midway, the U.S. Navy, including 3 carriers, was racing towards the island. Fighters and bombers were being deployed. Enemy cruisers and destroyers was the general target, but the fortresses went after enemy carriers. This B-17 found its target and is leveling off for a bomb run from a 4,000 feet altitude. The battle for the Midway had now started in earnest. The deployment of fighters, bombers, carriers, destroyers, and cruisers was a new tactical approach, and it did appear to become a general free-for-all. During the three-day battle, the Japanese lost 4 carriers, 2 heavy cruisers, and 3 destroyers, in addition to 275 aircraft and 4,800 men. The threat of invasion had gone, but many B-17 crews had to pay a heavy price as they sustained heavy casualties, and the installations on the island, including the hospital, had been wrecked. American losses were 19 officers and 250 other ranks. Avoiding a Japanese invasion of the Midway was of great strategical importance, and it was a definite bonus that the B-17 had proved itself as an efficient tactical defense weapon.
Yeah, the attack at Hamburg, end of July, beginning of August 1943, was more or less not a military attack, but it was just to create a fireball over the town and to hit the population and not so very much industrial areas. And from a high altitude bombing, you were not able to hit special targets. So the whole idea was to burn down the town and not to hit industrial targets. The attack against the civilian population was planned more or less by Lord Chervil, who was advisor to Churchill, and he told Churchill in a letter actually how many bomber he needs to wipe out 58 big German towns, and when all these towns were burning, he thought that the people would stop the war if possible, or convince the government to stop the war, what really did not happen. The casualties of these 3 night attacks and some casualties from the day attacks of the 8th US Army Air Force were about 31,000 identified people killed, and we reckon that it were about 35,000. But additionally, you must think that there were about 10,000 more who lived around Hamburg.
The devastation of Hamburg and Dresden by Allied bombers had been a subject for many post-war discussions and recriminations. It is important then to understand the B-17's role and the role of the Air Force that deployed it.
the American B-17, they just did 2-day attacks, and they definitely only attacked the harbor area and 2 or 3 other industrial targets. And out from the documents we have from the Public Record Office and the films which are available there, you can really see that they just attacked industrial targets while the Bomber Command, what was his task, during the nights bombed the town, because it's impossible to, when you fly at a high level, to aim at a certain target, so they just aimed at the town.
More than 13,000 B-17s took to the air between 1939 and 1945 and proved itself on every front to justify its name. It was indeed a flying fortress.